Around the clock, sports all the time. That's never going to work. That's ridiculous.
Just remember to have fun out there today. And if you lose, I'll kill you.
This is Talk Can Audio.
Seriously, this thing is going to be a cultural disaster.
What's happening, good listener? Welcome inside another week of Talk Can Audio. Matt Robinson with you in one of our many satellite studios across Ontario. Hope you all had a fantastic weekend. Lots to get to today with one of our pals. Michaela Schreiter's here from She's Got Game on the TSN Radio Network and now in podcast form. What's going on, Schreids?
Well, Matt, you and I just had some pre-show banter where we made a joke about the Schreids of March.
Yes.
Because it is almost March. And you informed me that you had made that joke to me in 2021. And now I'm questioning, what do I remember from the year of our Lord 2021? Which is not much. So I'm doing great.
We do have to make sure you're on here at least once in March so we can use that reference at least once more when it actually fits.
Absolutely.
So we'll come knocking on the actual Schreids of March. What's going on out in the valley there?
Well, it's snowing, as it has been for 7 months straight now. So that's great. Can you tell the seasonal depression's really hitting?
Setting right in. Yep.
It's like the depths of winter. I have not it's a real tough time of year. So I'm thriving right now. I'm doing a lot of self-care. And I'm here for the positive motivational speaking that I know you brought me on here for.
Okay. Let me regroup here a little bit. You were, I was, chatting with you last weekend a little bit. I guess you got out of town to a friend's cottage. Did you manage to get out? Because that was when we got dumped on, and cottage often screams to me on a road that might be the last to be plowed.
Oh, yeah. So my friend and I rented a cottage in Val-de-Mont, and we called it our reading retreat. So we were going there to do nothing but read books. The husbands were not invited because they were not going to read books, which was the whole purpose of this trip. So we drove up there, and then it started snowing. It did not stop until the day we left. We got probably about 30 centimeters. And I think that the hosts of this cabin, it was an Airbnb, they must have thought it was some sort of romantic getaway because we get there and there's this big welcome package with like Valentine's Day heart chocolates and wine and stuff. So in this relationship with my friend Katie, I was the one who starts fires and shovels snow, and she was the one who cooks and cleans. So those were the roles that we assumed. So I did a lot of shoveling, unfortunately, but I also did a lot of reading. So it was a very good weekend.
Okay. It sounds lovely. Yeah. Sounds romantic. Sounds like everyone had a nice time. I guess it was Valentine's Day, the Friday, right? So that was very thoughtful for Airbnb.
Naturally, we left our husbands at home.
Yeah, of course. Man, that's for... I was just talking to somebody about this, like the early days, and maybe they're still out there, but like the early days of Uber, I remember like there were certain drivers you could tell were going like above and beyond. They had like cold bottles of water in the back and like a phone charging cable or like little extras that you could tell were people like going above and beyond to try and stand out. And now I don't remember the last time I saw anything like that in an Uber. It's just get in and get out, right? So, Airbnb, apparently there's still some nice hosts out there. Somebody thoughtful enough to leave a nice Valentine's Day package for what they thought was a romantic getaway.
Yep. Hey, you know what? We did have a romantic time, so we apprecited it. The last couple of Airbnbs I've stayed at, I've had similar kind of vibes. We stayed at one in Vermont where they knew our dogs were going to be there, so they gave us like a little welcome package of some local craft beer and some treats for our dogs.
Nice.
It's very nice.
That is nice. Yeah. Speaking of craft beer, what are we having today, Schreids?
Well, we just tapped, by just, I mean, I think a week or two ago now, we tapped a new keg here at the Schreiter Jack Bar of Great Lakes Canuck Pale Ale, which, as you know, is my favorite beer of all time.
Yep.
So I'm going with that today. I'm not overthinking it.
I was thinking about you the other day. I had one of those on the Thursday edition of the show leading up to Canada-USA and the Four Nations final. I was like, I need something patriotic and... You know, it was that or Molson Canadian, and we can talk about that a little bit. I went with the Canuck Pale Ale, and then during the game, I was a little stressed. The game turned out to be something that mattered. This little gimmick tournament got kind of intense. We can talk about that. So I had a bit of Bacardi, and then I can't remember. I did have a craft beer of some kind. It was something from Nita. And I was sitting there in overtime, and I'm just like, nope, I'm uneasy. I need something. I got to tip the scales here a little bit. Cracked into a Molson Canadian. Boom, McDavid, game over. We remain undefeated. And of course, in the replies, I have people like, it's not even a Canadian beer anymore. I'm like, I get it. I understand.
Yeah.
But it worked, didn't it? Can you just cut me some slack? It's got the leaf on it, and it says Canadian. I'm riding with it, and it worked. So get off my back.
Exactly. Sometimes we don't overthink it.
No.
Sometimes Tim Hortons is still Canadian.
That's right.
Sometimes Molson Canadian is still Canadian.
That's right. Speaking of, and we'll get into this a little bit. I'm not sure if you're aware of this. I know you'll want to help us spread the word here as we move forward. But first, the pint I'm going with is from Whippersnapper. And we're recording this a little earlier in the day on Sunday than usual. It isn't quite Sunday morning, but we're not that far removed from Sunday morning. And this is one that Ian brought over the last time I saw him. It is from the, like I said, the Whippersnapper Brewing Company. It's called the Sunday Morning Stout. Nice and easy, 5%. Sometimes when Ian brings me things, he crushes me with a 10.5% something or whatever. This is easy like Sunday morning. Schreids, a nice coffee stout, an espresso stout. Like I said, I'm not sure if this is new because he cycles, as you know, a lot of things in and out, and he's always trying new things, but he brings stuff back. So I'm not sure if this is new or not, but it seemed appropriate for the day. It's early in the day on Sunday, 5% coffee stout, meant to be like a brunch kind of thing. So that's what we're getting into here.
It's basically coffee, Matt.
Mm-hmm.
I think you could have drank that at 9 a.m.
Which, funny enough, fine. I don't like. I don't drink coffee.
And you love your coffee beers.
Yes, I do.
It's very confusing.
I'm a complicated man, Michaela.
He contains multitudes, folks.
Whippersnapper, and I mentioned Nita there a second ago, are two of many breweries. Dominion City is in, Kitchissippi is in, Spark is in, across Ottawa that Andy has reached out to. He's a community builder. He likes to talk to people. And they're doing this blood drive, Friends of Craft Beer. The jokes have been made. I'm going to beat you to it this time, Schreids, that your blood alcohol level does have to be down when you go in to give. So maybe this isn't the right community to be pushing to go and do this. But it's just an idea to get more people out and involved in giving blood in the community, especially this time of year. People, it's kind of cold out. It's kind of shit out. Nobody wants to go and do things. But this is when a lot of accidents can happen. There are people out there that, it's needed as much as ever. And Andy's wife works for Canadian Blood Services. So I think this was sort of her thing. And he reached out and huge swath. I missed a bunch of breweries, but across town, people have gotten involved. And we'll link to the information in the show notes, but it's called Friends of Craft Beer. They're just looking to get more people out and giving blood. They've set a goal. You can read all about it in the link that we'll provide there. But I thought it was a pretty cool initiative. Anything that kind of can reach out through a community, build this sort of sense of like give people a reason to go, to be a part of something, right? And so Friends of Craft Beer, blood donation. I'm not sure if you'd heard about this, Schreids, but lots of our favorite breweries involved.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. I hadn't heard about that, so that's really cool. I would love to participate. However, the one time I tried to give blood, I almost passed out. So I have been too afraid to go back. But I love that for them. And I love it for anybody who is physically able to do it.
Sure. Did you almost pass out of fear or out of blood loss?
Out of, I didn't listen to the instructions of make sure you eat a decent meal and drink lots of water.
You should do that.
You should do that. And normally, like, anybody who knows me knows that I love drinking water. Water is my passion, and I never forget to eat. I'm not the kind of girl who forgets to eat. I'm the kind of girl who forgets that I ate and I eat again. And it was a blood drive at work, and I got really, really busy that day, and I completely just got sidetracked, and then I went at the last minute, and I was like, oh, I'll be fine. No, it wasn't.
No. There are reasons they give this advice. You're one of those I know better than doctors people, Schreids. We don't like those people.
I did my own research. Yeah. No, I'm just kidding. I don't actually think that. Please don't put me in that category.
It's cool. As you know, I had in 2011, I had a kidney transplant, and when you are going to give like donate an organ, it's a bit of an ordeal. You're going to be in hospital for a few days. You're going to be sore afterwards. You're whatever. And so, when people would ask me, to support you, Matt, like as a friend, like what can I do? I'm like, well, not everybody can give an organ, but everybody can give blood except Schreids. Everybody else can give blood. It's an easy thing. You're in and out. Sometimes you even get a little treat. They'll give you some juice or something, spike your blood sugar again. I was joking with Ian. He sent me a picture when he went in. I told him to hustle back to the brewery. He was going to be a cheap drunk for a little while, just 1 or 2 beers. He'll be feeling great all day. It's an easy thing to do. It doesn't cost you anything but time, and and it's not even much of that. So we'll link to it in the show notes. Awesome initiative. Congratulations to all the breweries who are doing that, and we're going to keep mentioning it here because I think it's an awesome initiative.
Love it.
Lots we can get to today, Schreids. There's plenty on the agenda, but I guess just in chronological order, we might as well touch on this Four Nations face-off. But later on, I want to touch on the PWHL a little bit. I want to talk about 2 vastly different outcomes in Ottawa versus Montreal hockey games on Saturday. Lots we can talk about here, but just in a general sense, coming into the Four Nations and coming out of the Four Nations, for you, did it meet expectations? Did it surpass expectations? Was it sort of what you thought it would be? How much did it grab onto you?
So I will fully admit, coming into this tournament, I could not have cared less about anything in the sports world. I would have probably watched a golf tournament before I would watch this. I had zero interest in it. I was mad. I promise I'm going somewhere positive with this. I was mad that the NHL robbed us of almost an entire generation of best on best hockey tournaments at the Olympics, and we're trying to make us forget about that by giving us this make-believe. I know all tournaments are make-believe, but this extra make-believe tournament.
8 days with some of the countries.
So, yeah, and I'm not immune to the Four Nations. Like there used to be a Four Nations Cup in women's hockey when we didn't have professional women's hockey to watch. So I used to watch that all the time.
I've talked before, Schreids. I don't want to interrupt you, but just because you bring up this tournament, when people ask me about the loudest sporting events I've ever been to, by far number one, I've always said, is George St. Pierre in Montreal versus Carlos Condit for UFC 156 or whatever it was. Number 2, Kitchener Auditorium, Canada-USA Four Nations Cup in 2003, it might have been, or 2002. It doesn't really matter. But we are in the heart of Haley Wickenheiser's prime and like some of these stars. And in that little barn, which is known for being loud anyway, that Four Nations Cup, which was always sort of, it wasn't the Olympics, it wasn't the World Championships, but anytime, as you know, you put Canada, USA in a full barn, it's going to be a blast. That is the second loudest sporting event I've ever been to.
Yes, yeah. So like this model of tournament in it being usually the top 4 countries. In this case, it was the top 4 countries with the most NHL players.
Yeah.
I'm not unfamiliar with that format. I had nothing against that. It was just the concept of, I'm not going to let the NHL get away with the fact that we should have been having this for a long time.
Sure.
Right. But then the first game happened and I saw Connor McDavid, Nate McKinnon, and Sidney Crosby on a line together. And I swear to Almighty Christ, I could hear the national anthem playing in my head.
That first power play, bing, bing, slam. You're like, oh yeah.
Oh, we are so back. And then you add this whole, I don't know if you know this, there's a bit of a political situation between our two countries.
Yes.
A little bit of tension. I do love that the NHL, let's call a spade. They fell ass backwards into one of the most entertaining and critical games between Canada and the US in hockey history because of the political climate. And I don't want to say they got lucky because this political climate is very, very serious, and
but for
I don't want to make light
something
of it.
Patriotic, you're right. This was total luck that it blew up when it did. And for a league who has gone out of its way over and over and over to not be political, anything that could be even marginally controversial, canceled. No, we're not doing it. We're not. And then you fall, like you said, ass backwards into the most politically charged sporting event perhaps since the Miracle on Ice in 1980.
Honestly, they really did that. The league itself, for the purposes of this tournament, they got very lucky they benefited from a otherwise very bleak situation. And yeah, I'll admit I was all in, especially on that final. Like the Thursday night, there was a PWHL game that night, so I had to go to that.
Yeah. And
after it was a little bit of a lighter media night because most media were covering this other game. Carla McLeod even acknowledged and thanked us all for being there. And I said, yeah, there's this other game going on. And she was like, it's an exhibition game. And I was like, that's fair.
Our game
She's
counts
not wrong.
for something.
But as I was leaving the rink, they had it playing on the Jumbotron, and like half of the Boston Fleet were out there watching it, like standing near the ice. And I by the grace of Sidney Crosby, I got home in time for overtime. Literally right as I got home, the third period was ending. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to get to watch this. And Josh, my husband, was sleeping. So he was sleeping to the tune of, he had his iPad next to him and it was playing the game. So he was like awake, but like his eyes were closed. So I was trying not to be too loud. And when Connor McDavid scored, like I silent screamed and I almost burst a blood vessel in my forehead. Like for a tournament that I genuinely couldn't have given fewer fucks about at the beginning. I feel like it's one of my favorite sports memories. All of a sudden, like it really did flip a switch within like a week. It was wild.
It really was. And it's funny because I don't have cable at my place. I've been one of those cable cutter people, and yeah, I had some family in town on Thursday, and my sister also came by who couldn't possibly care less about hockey, and so we're just watching the game on Sportsnet, and I think it was Colton Parayko who's breaking the puck out before the first goal, and the game froze on my internet. And at the time, I sort of just sat there for a second and didn't do anything because you've streamed enough things. Often it just comes back. It just takes a second or two. And so I don't want to, jump the gun, back out, restart it. I'm just going to give it a second. It doesn't come, so I do have to back out of the app, jump back in, and start the stream. And they're celebrating McKinnon's 1-0 goal. And my mom is like looking at me like, this is streaming world, eh? We just missed the first goal. And in my head, like I sort of said, sort of sarcastically, sort of half joking, like, I didn't care for that. And she, with no hint of sarcasm or humor, goes, neither did I. Like, this is just the way it's going to be all night, Matt. Yeah. Sure enough, it wasn't. But same as you, once overtime went, luckily I didn't have anyone sleeping next to me or whatever. Although they did say on the Leaf broadcast on Saturday night that John Tavares, when they interviewed him about the game, they asked him, what did you think of the overtime winners? I saw it in the morning. I went to bed after the third. And you're like, that is the most John Tavares thing I've ever heard.
Not one bit of that is surprising.
No, but
God bless John.
when McDavid scores, I was like, I was a kid again. Full fist pump, yelled, like,
oh yeah,
it for something that, like you said, and I was higher on it than most going into it. Like I said to a bunch of people, once this starts, you'll care. Like I didn't think it would become this, obviously, but once it gets going, you'll get into it. And a bunch of people, some were like, yeah, you're probably right, and others were like, I don't know, it feels kind of gimmicky. But all of those people, by the end of it, I know were just as plugged in. And yeah, I don't, at this point, and maybe it's just that my favorite team doesn't give me very many big moments to celebrate. It's been a while since I've yelled like that at an overtime winner. This was a full-throated yell, fist pump. Like, it was awesome.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was, it felt like obviously it's not quite that level, but it did feel very golden goal-esque. Yep. Right, and it had to be Connor McDavid. As you said,
a lot of that is what's going on outside of the sports world, kind of giving you this, like, okay, no, I want to beat these guys now, as opposed to,
and does it mean we won the trade war?
Yeah, the tariffs
canceled. Are gone.
Yeah, no,
good, cool,
it's over. We defended ourselves via hockey game, and we did it well.
We defended our sovereignty.
And you know what? If there was ever like choose your arena to defend your sovereignty, this would be the one we would choose. It might not be the one they would choose, but it would be the one we'd probably go with.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned McDavid scoring the goal there, and to his credit, in the post-game festivities when they were being interviewed, they said, did this feel like a passing of the torch moment, from the Crosby era to the McDavid era? And he was never going to say anything that wasn't respectful. But he sort of said, no, this isn't. We're going to the Olympics next year. Sidney Crosby will be the captain of that team as well. I'm, of course, paraphrasing, but Crosby will be the captain of that team as well. There had been some speculation that maybe Hockey Canada would talk to Sid and say, maybe Connor is the captain at the Olympics. As you would, be lending your support to him kind of thing. I remember before the 2014 Olympics when they asked Sid if he was to be captain, he said, I'm honored, but I'd like to talk to Jonathan Toews about it, because at that time, those were the two next guys after Niedermayer had done it in 2010. So I don't think Crosby would object to it, but this was Connor quite clearly saying, no, any locker room that still has Sidney Crosby in it, he's not and should not pass the torch to anybody, and him also making it clear, I expect Sid will be the captain next year. I wonder, at this tournament that we both acknowledge was sort of made up and kind of dreamed up out of nowhere as an appetizer for the Olympics that suddenly became a big deal. Does this feel like a step for McDavid, or, because we'll probably never see another Four Nations face-off, is it almost like it doesn't count? Is he started down that road towards that Marie-Philippe Poulin, Sidney Crosby in a big championship game? They are going to make a big play that matters. Was this enough, or what was it because of this sort of lesser stature of the tournament? Is it too soon to say that?
I mean, I think it's fair to say he's certainly on his way. This is a stepping stone. It's one goal for sure, but it felt very fitting that it was him. And I think because of that, it just kind of makes sense that oh yeah, this is just our next generation of
right.
the big player, right? And I was talking to Vanessa about this, and we all forget in 2010, before the Golden Goal, unless you were a Pittsburgh Penguins fan, you did not like Sidney Crosby. You hated him because he didn't play for your team. He was very good. People called him whiny, but I also think he was beaten to death on the ice almost every game.
And by then, that was starting to go out of his game, but it was a very real narrative that was still in people's head that this guy dives and he complains to the refs and stuff. And the other thing people don't remember about 2010 because of how it finished, he was sort of getting criticized. He hadn't really shown up until the gold medal game, and believe it or not, I remember it always stands out to me. I'm sure you've seen it. There's always this clip that goes around on the anniversary that's the call of that goal from all around the world, right? All these different networks and what that it's called the Iggy heard round the world. And it's the BBC. It's this British broadcaster who calls the goals, calls the shoot and score, and then says it's taken him to come to the party for Canada to celebrate.
Here's Iginla. It's all about Sidney Crosby. It's taken a while for him to come to the party. He can celebrate. Canada can celebrate. Sidney Crosby biding his time. No points last two games. It's the game-winning goal. It's the gold medal-winning goal.
And it's sort of he finally showed up and did something. He had been dead quiet during that tournament, and same thing in 2014. Not quite as quiet, but he wasn't dominating like he did in the NHL, and then of course scores on the breakaway in the gold medal game. In these big moments, he shows up, but you're right, early on, people didn't really want to wrap their arms around him.
Yeah, if you weren't a Penguins fan, but you're a Canadian hockey fan, all you knew was that he was very, very good and he didn't play for your team. And therefore,
beating the Sens in the playoffs.
Yeah. Actually, at that point, it had only happened twice.
Okay.
Actually, I know we had beat them at least once, so it didn't feel as painful at that point. But anyway, the golden goal brought Sidney Crosby to another level. Right, there was pre-Vancouver and there was post-Vancouver when it comes to Crosby's reputation in Canada. Mm-hmm. And I know it doesn't feel like that because we've been hearing about him since he was 13 years old. But at that point, we hadn't seen him in a major tournament for a number of years, and he was in the NHL not playing for a Canadian team.
Right.
So he didn't have that royalty Canadian athlete status, and then that one goal changed it. And I do feel like you could make a similar comparison to Connor McDavid. We all know he's amazing, but he doesn't, unless you're an Edmonton Oilers fan, you don't want to see McDavid playing against your team. He's very fucking good, and he does not play for your team, and that's all you know. And we definitely have not gotten to see him in a major international tournament playing for Canada, so we haven't had that same emotional connection to him since the World Juniors many, many years ago. So I think this just helped solidify him a little bit more in that like royalty status for Canadian athletes that we just hadn't gotten yet because we don't have him in those international tournaments. Like, I think, one thing with the Marie-Philippe Poulins and Haley Wickenheisers and Christine Sinclairs of the world is like, we never didn't see them in international tournaments, right? That for a long time, that was the only time we got to see them. So it was so easy to just, we got to see them in situations that they scored big goals and made clutch plays. And so we built that narrative in our head of them being royalty, and we haven't gotten that opportunity for McDavid yet. So it was nice to finally get that, I think. And it all it did was make me so excited for the Olympics. And I know the NHL, like they've said they're going, but there's always Batman loves to play fucking word.
Oh, you're not planting this seed, are you? Oh no.
I'll believe it when I see it. It's one of those things where like until I see them all step on the ice in it's Milan in 2020.
Milan Cortina,
2026.
26.
So next year, until I see it, I will remain skeptical, but I am very excited for it.
Yeah, there's a possibility, if everything goes the way we all hope it would, that perhaps Poulin and McDavid are leading Team Canada into the closing ceremonies with a couple of gold medals around their neck. Flag bearers.
Oh my God, hook it to my veins.
Let's get a look at that, right? But like, it's I think you're right. Like, that moment I talked about where with the fist pump and the yell comes off exactly the same if it's Anthony Cirelli or Brandon Hagel or whatever. I wanted the win. I didn't care how we got it, right? But the fact that it was McDavid and he kind of joins that when we from now on go into these tournaments, and every network puts together these highlight packs that feature Paul Henderson, right? And the golden goal and whatever else. There's, in my opinion, even though you may not in 10 years remember what this tournament was called, I think you will remember that moment and the best players in the world. And it's funny, Paul Henderson wasn't one of the best players in the NHL when he got his moment. It was that moment that made him a name. But 87, it's Gretzky to Lemieux. And, there's always these sorts of highlight packs that come together. There's no chance that moving forward, that Connor McDavid goal isn't on those at that level. Overtime winner, best player in the world, scores to win Canada the gold. I think if he hasn't quite arrived on their level, and you got to do it a couple times. Poulin and Crosby have set a difficult bar to jump over. He hasn't quite gotten there yet, but he has at least, started down that path now of being the best player in the world who has now done something huge internationally, and he's going to have a couple more opportunities to do it at the Olympics, and we're going to do the World Cup thing again. It was really fun to see it be him. Like I said, it would have been amazing no matter who it was, but the fact that it was him, it's just so sweet that the story plays out that way, right?
It made it that much better, especially for those of us, and I can't believe I'm about to say this, but those of us who remember 2010, because there's a lot of hockey fans who maybe don't.
Gross.
That didn't make me feel like a dinosaur. But one thing I also wanted to say, and we've alluded to the fact that this is a nothing tournament, made up tournament by the NHL, and it absolutely is. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I will give McDavid a ton of credit for the meeting of the moment, if you will, because no one anticipated that whatever the gold medal matchup, whatever the championship matchup in this tournament, no one really anticipated it having the weight that it did.
That's right.
And we knew, those players can say they blocked it out all they want, but like they knew how big this was for Canada. And so it may not be the Olympics, but it felt like an Olympic moment because it's a feeling. It's a everything time and a around place.
It. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So I think he gets a ton of credit for just like it's that much more significant.
This was a significant few days for the Tkachuk brothers, but at the end of the day, only one was left standing. Now we'll talk about the Habs and Sens here in a few minutes, but Brady Tkachuk, for people who I alluded to this the other day on the podcast. You know, there aren't a lot of American fans who see the Sens on American national television. And when I tweeted something similar, the first reply was there aren't many Canadians who see the Sens on national television all that often. Mm-hmm. Brady Tkachuk has been a guy that, you know, certainly you watch a lot. Me living in Ottawa and talking about the Sens on this show, I've watched him a lot. We knew how good he was, and the statement had always been, just wait till this guy gets to have a run at playoff hockey. And yet, he hasn't yet seen the playoff hockey thing. That appears to be more likely this year than in past years. But he got a chance at something bigger, and this tournament suddenly started bringing in huge ratings in the United States. And for hockey fans across America who didn't know much about Brady Tkachuk, they know about him now. And, you know, 2 goals in the Canada game on Saturday where the Americans won. Another one on the Thursday championship game. Had a couple other opportunities. He and Matthews both had a crack at it in overtime where Binnington was fantastic. And I just wonder, you know, is this the same Brady that you've always watched who now brought his game to that bigger stage? Or did he get to that bigger stage and elevate in a way that, man, I don't know walking out of this. Like, I don't think Austin Matthews was as bad as people said he was, but he certainly didn't grab the moment like the Tkachuk brothers did. And walking away from this, because Matthew could hardly play in the championship, it would be hard to argue that in this moment, Brady Tkachuk isn't the face of USA hockey right now, or at least in that conversation. Did you feel he elevated to that point?
Yeah, it's hard for me to say because I'm going to completely admit I am so biased on this conversation. Like I feel like I've always known that Brady Tkachuk had this potential, and I feel like I have seen it, even though he hasn't been in the playoffs for the Sens. There's just been moments throughout his time as an Ottawa Senator that I'm like, good God, this man is a gamer. Like, it just he has another level, and like it's one of those things where because he's on your team, you almost don't appreciate it as much. It's almost like a Brad Marchand thing, right? Like, you hate him. Yeah. When he's you almost hate him more as an opponent than the fans of his team love him, if that makes any sense. And so I think I've always viewed Brady Tkachuk as he's on my team, so I love him, and that's great. And then all of a sudden he wasn't on my team, and I'm like, oh my God, this man is a menace.
I hate playing against him. Yeah.
Like, I obviously didn't see the bulk of the regulation of the championship game, but we were following along, and I was like, it had to be 2 Ottawa Senators, didn't it? It had to be Brady Tkachuk and Drake Sanderson.
From the other side of that rivalry, I'm like, of course, like in the most hateable game, it's 2 Sens for Team USA. Fuck off, right?
The bad guys, but I was so conflicted. And at this, like obviously I didn't want America to win in any way, shape, or form, but it was like, oh, this is what it feels like to be on the other side of this. I don't like it at all.
Right.
So yeah, like I don't know if it really answers the question, but like I do feel like I always kind of knew he had it in him, and we've always been waiting for him to finally get to the playoffs, and I'm God, please, dear baby Jesus, make this be the year, because we've seen, okay, no, now we know for sure in a all or nothing game in a big tournament, like, this guy is an absolute beast. So like, please let us see this in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think a lot of the advertising going into this was about Matthew Tkachuk and to a lesser extent about Austin Matthews, but he was their captain, and he's, you know, probably the best goal scorer in American history. So, but he doesn't break through, and Matthew isn't able to finish the tournament. And so, yeah, like coming out of this, I guess the other guy you would probably put on that level right now is Connor Hellebuck. And because he's behind the mask, it's hard to be the face of anything. Like, you know, people don't necessarily recognize you in the street the same way they might if Brady was walking down the street after that game. And yet he plays in Ottawa. He will be back off the radar a little bit. I saw some Sens fans taking different looks at this. There had been whispers in the past, not recently, but that maybe Brady hadn't been thrilled when they fired DJ, and, you know, will he someday want to leave? And now all of a sudden you're one of the faces of USA hockey. Does that scare you as a Sens fan, that if he becomes this huge star, he may want to get back down closer to that? Is it more the opposite? Like, no, this guy is now the biggest star in USA hockey, or amongst them, and he plays right here for us. Does any of that even come on your radar, or is that just silly talk that happens after a small tournament like this?
I mean, I think no matter what, Americans always look at the Ottawa Senators the same way, and that is who? And I hate to admit it, but like when they were in the Eastern Conference Finals in 2017, I remember listening to a American-based hockey podcast, and they were talking about just how, you know, dud of a matchup this was. Like, unfortunately, Ottawa is just one of those franchises that most American fans, unless they had some weird tie to Ottawa or they just became a fan for some reason, like they don't think much of Ottawa. And I don't love that, but it's just kind of the way it is. We're a smaller market team here in Canada. So any possibility of like an American hockey fan wanting to watch Brady Tkachuk and therefore being exposed to the Ottawa Senators, I think is a great thing. Yeah. Both for the Sens and for the NHL in general. Like, and thus there is the point of tournaments
More
like this.
More international hockey, please.
Yes. Is this thing on? Gary Bettman. Yeah. This works. Yeah. I know he's listening. So yeah, like I think it's great. I think at the end of the day, more eyeballs on the game, regardless of what team that is always good for the game. And like I don't know. As an Ottawa Senators fan, I'm always worried about everyone leaving to a certain extent. I just assume they're all going to leave one day. So now I'm even more worried about that, but I'll just try to enjoy it while I can.
Sure. He took Saturday night off. A lot of people who attended that tournament did. There's actually some talk that Matthew Tkachuk might be seriously injured. This could last a while. 8 out of the 12 forwards who played last night, who had also played in the gold medal game on Thursday, had just awful stat lines. Like the Leafs played, and I watched that one obviously start to finish, and thank goodness for a big night from Alex Steeves, because it didn't really look like Marner and Matthews had much going on. Probably a bit of a late night for Mitchie, certainly. I wanted to ask you a little bit about him as someone who is probably able to speak more dispassionately about him than I am. I had sort of said in that same show leading into the Thursday night championship game that neither one of the Leafs' big guys who had been presented this opportunity to really grab a hold of this outside of that Leafs umbrella and say, this narrative that we don't perform in big games is misplaced. And then Mitch scored, to his credit, that overtime winner on the Saturday, or the first game against Sweden in overtime. But, I've always said on this show, I don't want to shy away from it now and be a hypocrite. The 3-on-3 is a bit of a coin toss. And once you get out there, who knows what's going to happen. And then it wasn't long after that before John Cooper decides, you're not the guy to play with McDavid. We're pushing you down to the third line. You're going to check and penalty kill with Cirelli and Hagel. And Mitch is capable of that. But once we got into that championship, all of a sudden, John Cooper goes, okay, it's not quite working with Mark Stone. I'm going to give you another chance up with McDavid and see, if you can make a play. And to his credit, he makes 2 great plays on the tying goal and the game-winning goal. And so I just wonder how much, if at all, any player is able to rehabilitate their image in a quick little 4-game tournament. Or is this just a case of it's an all-star team, someone was going to make that play and McDavid was going to bury it? Like, as far as what Mitch Marner can take moving forward from this experience into the playoffs, or at least as spectators, what we might take from this event, watching him in the playoffs, does this mean anything? Or is it still, you're back under that blue and white light in the playoffs and we'll see then? Did this mean anything for Mitch?
I'm not going to lie, because it was McDavid, because I didn't hear anybody talking about Mitch Marner after that tournament, right? Because we all blacked out after that goal was scored. And I'm like, he assisted on that goal, right? I'm not dreaming. I didn't even check the stat line.
No, it's true. That happened.
Okay. I was like, he's 16, right? Yeah. And yet, like, that didn't even register in my mind. And it's not because it's Mitch Marner. It is not because he's a Toronto Maple Leaf. It's because all I saw was the puck go in and McDavid. And whereas I was like,
over here, as usual, it's how does this affect the Leafs, right?
No, of course, naturally. Like if Brady Tkachuk were a Canadian and he assisted on that, I would have a tattoo of his face on my body right by now. So like, I totally get it. But yeah, like as a non-Leafs fan, and it's not like I definitely am not a Mitch Marner hater. Like again, he's one of those players for the Leafs that Leafs fans don't always love. Mm-hmm. Therefore, I like him. Much like William Nylander, if he's a divisive figure in the Leafs fandom, he's my guy.
Easier for Michaela to like him.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, it's hard because he had a really solid tournament on a really great team. Like I think he performed very well. He did what Mitch Marner does best, and he set up plays, right? And he did it very well on a very good team. And you know, he may not get the headlines. He was overshadowed, of course, by McDavid scoring that goal. But unless we had heard Sidney Crosby, if we hadn't heard Sidney Crosby yell Iggy, I don't know that we would be talking about Jerome McGinley making that
Great
pass.
point.
Right? Like it was a beautiful pass, by the way, because he was falling, and we just don't talk enough about it. But
no,
like,
you're right. Though it's the fact
no
that the
one remembers
commentators
that.
had gone quiet in that moment, and you hear this kind of and it's just kind of a fun add-on to the goal. But you're right. If he just as easily could have yelled needs for Niedermeyer or whatever hockey nickname the guy he might have been out there with on that day. But you're right. We probably don't remember that it's a Ginla if there isn't that audible yell in the clip every time.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean that Leafs fans shouldn't be super happy with Mitch Marner's performance. I would be.
Yeah.
It's also worth noting that Austin Matthews could have intercepted that pass, and he didn't, and it probably haunts him to this day.
He
But
drifted
you know
out
what?
of position. He's the one who leaves. Now, Frank Corrado did a nice breakdown. He does sometimes on Twitter of the defenseman who screwed up that allowed or forced Austin to go, I better go get him. But in doing so, he made the problem worse in leaving the best player in the world wide open in front of the net. We also forget Austin Matthews had Binnington dead to rights a few minutes earlier in overtime and could not bury it. And, you know, that he doesn't have quite the same playoff reputation that Mitch does, but it is getting there that, like, you're the leader, you're the big dog. Why aren't you scoring, you know, in these big moments for Toronto? And he was unable to shed that particular, label in this tournament. Like, he's coming home still having to wear that a little bit.
Can we talk about Jordan Binnington for a second,
We
though?
can.
I am so sorry for every bad thing I ever said about his playing ability, because in that, and now again, did not watch regulation, but I did see overtime, and there were several times that I swore a blood oath to this man because of his incredible, unbelievable big time saves.
Yeah.
And I know that, I think the narrative at the end of the game was it was evident from a goalie perspective who has been there before and who hasn't. And Jordan Binnington deserves a lot of criticism. He hasn't been great and in the NHL and all that. But we forget, like, he won a freaking Stanley Cup not that long ago.
Yeah, that's right.
And you saw that ability to play under pressure. You saw that in overtime, like, just unbelievable, stonewalled.
Well, you're right, because through the
Americans,
round robin, you gave up one against Sweden, and you're like, he was largely okay the rest of the way, but you're just, and then against the U.S., I think 2 out of the 3 that he gave up were kind of like, I wish I could, like, not terrible, but just, you got to give me a save there. And again, in between, he was fantastic, right? But he still gave up those 2 clunkers, and you're just like, this is a problem. Finland, Canada's cruising. They're up 4-0 late in the third. Bang, 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 4-3.
Oof.
And again, I don't think any of those were terrible, but you're just like, we had this opportunity to get out of that game, still feeling good about him now. And, you know, you had this great game heading into and instead there's still now this kind of, but they sort of collapsed late and he was a part of it. There was nothing on any of the goals in the championship where you would have, like, either goal, you were just like, yeah, that's not his fault. What are you going to do? And then he was stellar in overtime. So yeah, this idea that when the lights are on and a championship is on the line, this is a guy who has gotten it done before, and man, absolutely gotten it done. In that game, like, a couple of the saves he made in overtime were unreasonable to ask any goaltender to make, and yet he got there and kept you alive. And Brad Marchand said it in the post-game presser. He's like, he is the sole reason we won this game. Now, that's a little hyperbolic because you scored 3 goals and those people helped as well, but he's right. Like, that game could have been over multiple times in overtime, and he kept them alive.
Yeah, and I think, like, to Brad Marchand's credit, something I never thought I'd say. I know. I feel like he felt he had to say that because every narrative of every game in this tournament for Canada was, hey, their goaltending is going to suck.
And you know what? It
hey,
will be again going into the Olympics.
Absolutely. Their goaltending is below league average because it is a fact.
Yes, it is.
And we all expected in every game that Jordan Binnington plays, hey, he's going to give up one or two absolute stinkers. And in overtime, he showed up. And that's like not to just boil the entire tournament for him down to that one overtime, but it was pretty important.
Yeah.
And it literally made or broke the entire tournament for them. Words are hard today.
Yeah.
So yeah, I understand why Brad Marchand would say something like that. You want to defend your guy, right?
Sure.
You just watched him get criticism in every game, and then he shows up like that in overtime and helps you win. I think you as a leader, that's kind of what you have to say.
For me, last thing on this, I would bring up, Sean Gentili from The Athletic, an American guy who has made no beef or made no secret of the fact that he was rooting for the U.S. and he said, I can do my job and cover the league, but this is now an international thing, and yeah, go USA. And he goes, for a year, 18 months, and he's not wrong about this when he says we have broken down, through these, first we'll do our predictions for who will make Canada's and USA's rosters, and then based on that, when these artificial rosters play each other, who would your prediction be, and these sorts of things. And he goes, for a year, 18 months, he goes, all of us American writers and a good number, maybe a majority of Canadian writers said the Americans have the better, deeper roster and should be the favorites coming into this. And he goes, it wasn't until it was over that I looked up and go, we did have the deeper roster. We did have the better blue line. But, while we have Matthews and the Tkachuks and whatever, who are very good, we don't have Connor McDavid. While we have Werenski and this very deep blue line, we don't quite have Cale Makar. And as long as those guys are on your team, I don't think he's wrong. I think the Americans did have the deeper roster, but we still had those absolute nuclear game breakers that just need a half second. And as long as Canada has that, and it's not like the rest of the roster was miles behind the U.S. or anything like that, but you still at 1C and 1D have the two best players at those positions that the USA couldn't quite match. And at the end of the day, it's Makar who keeps it in, pushes it down to Marner, who's then able to get it to McDavid. Both of those nuclear players featured in that championship winning goal. And it was just interesting to hear Gentili say, at some point USA will win one of these. That's upsetting to think about and whatever. But as long as Canada still has the absolute top of the pile, the depth is going to matter, and at some point it will work, but you're always going to be vulnerable to one of them just going, nope, not today, and snapping it into the net, right?
Yeah.
So God love that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was so much fun.
So you've been through this a few times, Strides, whether it be, the Olympic basketball back into the WNBA, international women's hockey back into, just the rivalry series of the PWHL. I can't speak for how the Habs Sens game went on Saturday, but watching the Leafs and going, oh, right, Pontus Holmberg is going to play tonight and David Kampf is going to be a part of this game. I'm used to a fourth line that had Sam Bennett on it or Kyle Connor on it, or it's a bit of an adjustment. I'm still happy we had the experience, but I think the next couple of days or weeks even of NHL hockey, maybe until we get to the playoffs, going to be a bit of a tough watch. Are there any tips on how to go from oh my God, this was the greatest thing I've ever seen to, oh God, it's Tuesday against the Hurricanes?
Yeah, it's hard coming down from that high because you go back into February hockey and you're like, oh, this doesn't matter. It's helpful that we're, it's really only a few weeks until we get to the trade deadline. And then after that, it's a playoff push. And I find that February in general is just, like I said, seasonal depression. It's a tough month. And the middle of any regular season in any sport, there's always a bit of a lull, and this tournament obviously was designed to help with that. But yeah, it's weird coming back. Plus, the quality of the hockey, as we saw on Saturday night, is not at its best. These players are tired. I do wish and I understand why they didn't because it was Saturday night, but they were in full control of this tournament schedule. They could have maybe made the final a Wednesday and given them 2 days off instead of them needing to go back to playing literally 48 hours later.
There was those guys, I can't remember who it was now. It might have been one of the Rangers or it doesn't matter. But when McDavid scored to end that championship game, there was 2 or 3 players on the ice who were going to be playing 36 hours later, 1 o'clock starts on Saturday. You're just like, this is a tough turnaround.
That's a recipe for disaster. You're not going to get great quality.
I think McDavid was one of them. They played in Philly at 1 p.m., the Oilers.
Good Lord.
How would you like to be on that
At least
plane?
Boston and Philly aren't too far away.
That's true enough. But the Flyers, to their credit, were sending a plane to get Sanheim and Konechny and John Tortorella and offered McDavid a flight to Philadelphia with them. And I just wonder, Sanheim, Konechny, and McDavid would have been in a fairly celebratory mood. But John Tortorella is the American assistant coach on the plane with you. I can't think of a more scowly face, like a guy who I'd less like to have sitting across the aisle from me on that plane. I would have loved to have seen what that flight looked like.
Yeah, no kidding. I think it's just managing expectations a little bit. We're all kind of coming down from that high. I remember the post-Vancouver depression that set in, after capping off the tournament with the golden goal, and then afterwards you're like, oh, I guess we just go to school tomorrow or work or whatever it was. And, there's a little bit of that with returning to regular season hockey. So, just managing expectations a tad there. And it's the quality will come back. These players will rest up and they'll get better. And then by that time, again, I think we'll be getting closer to the more meaningful part of the NHL season. But if you're like a Sens fan, for example, they're holding on by the skin of their teeth to that second wild card spot. So every game feels interesting right now. Especially down the stretch. It's been a while for Sens fans who have been in this hardcore playoff race, like you said, in the thick of it. That wasn't a great loss on Saturday night, right? And we saw both Montreal-based teams, the PWHL and the NHL, in Ottawa on Saturday, 2 vastly different results. Ottawa right now in the PWHL on the outside looking in, but with a big win over Montreal. The Sens inside, but with teams biting at their heels. What did you make of the kind of interesting, anyway, Montreal-Ottawa doubleheader on Saturday? Yeah, well, obviously I was at the Ottawa Charge Montreal Victoire game, which was, good God, it was nice to see them beat Montreal in regulation at home for the first time ever. It was a really solid game. I think it was one of Ottawa's most complete games I've seen them play. They not only did they beat Montreal and keep Marie-Philippe Poulin off the score sheet, they limited Montreal to 16 shots and basically doubled up on shots on them, which is great. And I thought they did a really good job shutting down one of the best offensive teams in the league. Gwyneth Phillips, to her credit, did have despite only facing 16 shots, she did have a great game, especially towards the end when Montreal was really pushing. It was Emily Clark, 2 goals. It's really nice to see her get to score. It always feels like she's kind of right there and just can't bury it. And so she finally did, which was nice. Laura Stacey loves to score on Ottawa. That's just what she does. She scored in this game 40%, I think, of her career goals in the PWHL are against Ottawa, which is wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Laura. But you know what? It was...
So even when we keep Poulin off the score sheet, we can't keep the family off.
What was I saying? It was the polar opposite from what we then got from the Ottawa Senators that night. So it was at least good that one Ottawa team, had some success against Montreal.
The second one, I'll be honest, I normally try and watch a bit of both, but being out of town, the Sens game not readily available where I'm sitting right now, so didn't flip between like I normally would. What went wrong? Sens versus Habs. That was a big game for the Sens. The Habs are a team behind them that you're trying to keep from getting back in the race. I believe I heard that was the first of 3 remaining games between Toronto. Always Toronto on the mind. Between Montreal. Always 3 left between Montreal and Ottawa. and Montreal was basically going to need to have all three of them. They grabbed the first one. What went wrong for the Sens on Saturday?
Oh, what didn't go wrong? It was just like, I hate.
We should mention, I suppose, Brady didn't play, and
so Brady didn't play. I mean, the chances they were given, I'm thinking of the two, they went down 2-0 fairly early on, and then they very quickly erased that lead with a beautiful goal from Tim Stützle and a great shot from the point from Jake Sanderson. And so I was kind of feeling like I was watching at a bar, so I wasn't hearing the commentary, but I kind of felt like, okay, maybe it took them a bit to find their legs, and those two goals came very easily. We can do this, and then very quickly it was 4-2, and I was like, well, never mind. They just looked disjointed. It was almost like no one knew where they were supposed to be. It felt like, there's no other way to explain it. It felt like a team that just hasn't played together in a couple of weeks, and maybe a couple of their players, they were missing one. Another one might have been a little tired.
Allmark didn't look particularly impressive.
No, he did not. So it just felt like a quintessential post-mid-season break game that you need to throw in the garbage and light on fire and forget and move on.
And I think from here, the Sens are off until Wednesday. So, whatever Brady was dealing with, and clearly there was something at the tournament, because he wasn't taking the practices. I don't think he played on the Monday game, did he, against Sweden? Either way, he was clearly either sick or beat up a little bit, played through it on Thursday, but I wasn't surprised that he wasn't good to go on Saturday. They called it a game time decision. He doesn't take the skate. But I would imagine now, when you don't have to play again until Wednesday, it didn't look, like I said, because he played on Thursday, it can't be anything overly serious. Travis Green was asked, will Brady be back for the next game? He said, well, I hope so. But with 3-4 days off, I would imagine you'll see him back in the lineup for Ottawa's next game. And clearly he's the engine that makes the whole thing go.
Yeah, exactly. And the reports I had seen were no one's very concerned. It's day to day. And I think they were really trying to emphasize that, because they didn't want people to go, oh my God, he got injured at the Four Nations and blah, blah, blah.
He played there, and he won't play for us now. And you're like, no, settle
exactly.
down.
I think they were really trying to hammer that home. So we have no reason to believe that's not true. And at the end of the day, I'm glad he maybe him being a part of that game would have changed the outcome, but I'm also glad he didn't have to experience that game.
Sure.
He and now they all get a couple days rest, and he gets a couple days rest, and whatever he's dealing with, he can address and come back stronger. So I think at the end of the day, what you're focusing on right now is, if you're a Sens fan, is you want to make the playoffs. So the first game back is not necessarily the most important thing. Yes, it was an important 2 points, but you want your captain to be strong for a playoff run, and then a playoff push, and then hopefully a playoff run. So if he has to sacrifice one game, I don't think it's the end of the world. Yeah,
it was an interesting turnaround for him. A big championship game on Thursday where he played a key role, and then a big divisional game on Saturday as playoff positioning on the line, and Sunday what they've been billing as Team Shabbat versus Team Tkachuk in the skills competition. You and I, as we sit here, don't know whether he made an appearance at that or not. I can't imagine it's of high priority, but it also wouldn't be overly demanding, so maybe he is there. But the other big sporting event, as you and I sit here and record, that's coming up a little later this afternoon, is down in Buffalo. The next takeover game for the PWHL sees the New York Sirens taking on the Boston Fleet. And this is, like I said, part of this tour. They've been bombing around North America, playing these different neutral site games, trying to test the market, trying to gauge the interest. And we've sort of reached a point where we're starting to wonder, is the expansion going to be coming next year? Will they put it off a little bit? And one of the things that has kicked up this storm a little was, over the last week or 10 days, they decided to push back the trade deadline 2 weeks. And if you're not sure why that's relevant, and honestly it took me a little time to figure it out, and luckily people smarter than me were writing about it, that said it gives you a little more time to sign some people who might be under European contracts right now, maybe are in college, and knowing that you're going to have to, if there's going to be expansion and an expansion draft, you have to leave available a certain number of players. You'll only be able to protect so many. So people will want to do a little rejigging around the rosters. This isn't that different than when we saw Vegas come in and Seattle come into the NHL. You saw some trades and some signings to make sure we're meeting the rules for the expansion draft. And so pushing back the trade deadline a little bit gives people a little more time to do that after these European seasons end and things like that. So it might be coincidental, it might be nothing, or it might be an indication that, yeah, we're expecting this summer to see an expansion draft in the PWHL. You and I have talked about this a couple times before, Schreids, that, you know, is it time? If it is, how many teams? What's too fast? You know, which of these markets have really shown themselves to be next in line? Are you reading much into the move to trade deadline, or are there other things that have your attention as we kind of speculate on whether expansion is coming?
Well, I don't know where it lines up with the news of pushing back the trade deadline, but a couple days ago, it was confirmed that the PWHL is planning on announcing expansion news in the next 4 to 6 weeks. That comes from Executive Vice President of Business Operations, Amy Shear. So they have fully confirmed that they're going to announce something.
Yeah.
She probably knows.
Yeah. And you speculated that it could be that we're not doing it. Maybe it's the news.
Yeah, like the way it's being framed is they're going to have expansion news in that time frame, which could be, hey, we're not ready to expand yet, or it could be, hey, we're expanding and here's our timeline.
Or it could be we're expanding, but it'll be next summer as opposed to this summer.
Yeah, like expansion news doesn't imply that it's happening next year.
Right.
It just implies that we're getting an update. So I think that's important. I think it makes me think that, okay, there's probably something there. We're probably getting the 2 cities that they're going to expand to, and we're probably, because I believe, and actually I'll have to look this up, I thought we were told at one point that by 2026 we would see an expanded league, but I could be just making that up. But I do think that there's a reason this got put out there. I think we will get the 2 cities and whatever timeline, be it next year or the year after, that they're actually joining the league. And that leads me to believe that it's probably 2 of the cities that they've already visited at this point of the takeover tour. So that's very exciting. I think it's a very good sign, and just based on the attendance levels at the takeover tour, I think there's very clearly an appetite for women's hockey in many of these cities. So I'm very excited about this.
Based on what you've seen, they did play a couple of neutral site games last year and then expanded that this year. And based on, what you've seen and the people that you talk to, do you have any sort of feeling on where they might be leaning in terms of, I assume if they're going to do this, it'll be by 2. An odd-numbered league makes things a little difficult when you're scheduling. It's not impossible, but I would imagine it would be by 2 cities. Do you have a feel or a prediction, a guess at all on where they might be leaning? Do they care at all about keeping things balanced, like a Canadian city, an American city, or could you do 2 of each? Like, any thoughts on that?
I would like to see them keep it balanced with American and Canadian cities. So I just based on the way they've gone so far, I think, we're probably getting 1 Canadian city, 1 American city. My gut says that Quebec City is part of this. They had a really, really great showing at the Videotron Center a few weeks ago between Montreal and Ottawa. That city has been starved for hockey and wanting a franchise there of some sort for many, many years. And I think it just location wise also makes sense. It's fairly easy to get to. You've got a built-in rivalry between Montreal and Quebec City right there. No history there whatsoever. And it still fits your geographical footprint, right? With Boston there and New York and like it's still in the eastern kind of area of the continent, so that all makes sense. And then I would think probably like a Detroit or Pittsburgh. I know both cities have had really strong support for the games that have played there, and I think both cities have been very vocal in wanting a team. I've heard Washington is also really vocal in wanting a team, but they haven't actually done a stop there.
No.
But they have a WNBA team and an NWSL team, so like there's a huge market there for women's sports. So I think the 2 of those cities that I listed will probably be the next round of expansion. And I know everyone says, oh, it's a big jump in travel and blah, blah, blah. But I think after that, they're going out west. And I think they're going to do Vancouver and Seattle in the same swap. Like, I think they're going to add those 2 teams at the same time, maybe in the next round of expansion. Keep it somewhat keep it even in terms of Canadian and American cities. And then if you're going to expand out west, at least you have a couple of teams do it at once, so that there's not one team sitting out there. There's two.
Yeah, you tie it into a road trip, hit both of them.
Exactly. You can plan travel and make it a lot.
Although the travel
less
for those two
daunting.
teams would be rough, but
but that's the same for any league.
I'm a little surprised, and again, I'll obviously defer to you on this. Calgary's got the history, right? And they did a nice job in the Canadian Women's Hockey League. I'm a little surprised that it would be Vancouver ahead of Calgary. Is that, do you think Calgary's in the mix here at all?
Well, they haven't done an expanded takeover tour there.
No.
They did one in Edmonton and got a great turnout last weekend. So
I'm a little sour on that. Turned out to be another overtime loss. Enough overtime losses.
I know. They don't know how to win in overtime, honestly. But yeah, they haven't gone to Calgary for whatever reason. And Calgary Inferno were wildly successful in the CWHL. So
I've been waiting
surprised
to see them on the radar somewhere, whether it be takeover or expansion or whatever, and it just doesn't seem to be. I haven't seen any talk of Calgary.
No, me neither. I don't know why that is, to be honest with you. But yeah, they just haven't been a part of this. So who knows? But Vancouver had a really great showing in the takeover tour, and I think so did Seattle, and I think they want to put something in Seattle. Seattle is such a great market, such a great hockey market, a new hockey market, and a great women's sports market. So you've kind of got you've got both ends of the sports spectrum there, I guess. But it just makes sense to have Vancouver and Seattle kind of join at the same time. There's a built-in rivalry.
Wishful thinking for Schreider, just looking for another reason to be able to go back to Seattle and maybe run into
exactly.
Subert.
I mean, Subert and Megan Rapinoe were there, so I think they have some say, and they're very powerful people. So I think they're going to make it happen.
Anything else we should touch on in this episode there, Schreids?
No. I think I'm scanning my brain for sports knowledge, and it's all gone.
Knowledge. We don't do that here. We do.
No, that's fair.
Feelings, power feelings, not power.
We do
thoughts.
vibes.
Yes, all vibes.
No notes, just vibes.
That's right. What's coming up on She's Got Game?
Well, this week we were joined by Ottawa Rapid FC head coach Katrina Pettersson because we now have a schedule for the Northern Super League, which is very exciting. So we talked to her about that. Ottawa will kick off their season on April 27th. That's a Sunday afternoon against Toronto, which is just perfect.
Yeah.
And the first official game of the Northern Super League will be on April 16th, so 10 p.m., which I have several issues with.
Yeah,
but
seriously.
Nonetheless, I'm genuinely thinking, what is easier, staying up past 10 or flying to Vancouver for the game? So while I deal with that, I hope you all go check out the schedule.
This is the counterweight for hoping for Seattle to get a hockey team is the 10 p.m. starts.
That's very true.
Every weekend on the TSN Radio Network, Michaela Schreiter and Vanessa Sanchez, and as I said, now in podcast form, as it has been for a while, but we'll link to that in the show notes as well. Schreids, always appreciate the time, and thank you for the vibes, the feelings, if not the thoughts.
That's what I bring, and nothing else.
We will wrap it up here. I can't tell you what's coming up next on this show, but there'll be something. There always is. Just vibes and feelings. We'll see where those take us here over the next couple days, so stay tuned for that. Like I said, Friends of Craft Beer, the blood donation drive. We'll link to that in the show notes as well. We'd love it if you get involved. And always important, always an easy thing to help out with. And as I'm told, it's in you to give. For Michaela Schreiter, my name's Matt Robinson. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
I've got nothing here. You're giving me baseball and hockey, and I got my keister blowing in the wind. That made to look like a fool here. That's just dumb. I don't want anything to do with this place. This place is run by a bunch of children.